Before we dive into tonight's tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want more creepy stories that will keep you up at night. Times Square was alive that evening, buzzing like it always did at 7:12 p.m. Neon billboards flashed their endless ads, energy drinks, Broadway shows, a grinning model selling toothpaste, bathing the crowds below in a kaleidoscope of electric blues and pinks. Tourists shuffled along, snapping selfies, their laughter mixing with the honk of yellow cabs and the distant wail of a street performer's saxophone. It was New York at its loudest, its most chaotic, the kind of place where you could feel the city's pulse in your bones. Then, like someone flipped a switch, every phone in the square screamed at once. A harsh, grating alert tone cut through the noise, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even read the words. People froze, fishing out their devices, and screens lit up with the same message. Terrorist threat detected. Shelter in place. The words glowed red, unblinking, as a robotic voice repeated them through crackling speakers perched on lampposts. The crowd's energy shifted. Laughter turned to sharp gasps, selfie sticks dropped, and a woman in a bright red coat clutched her kid's hand so tight he yelped. Nia was caught in the middle of it, her sneakers squeaking on the pavement as she pushed through the swarm. She'd been heading to grab a coffee after a brutal ER shift, her scrub still wrinkled under her jacket, her eyes sunken from too many nights staring at hospital ceilings. The alert hit her phone too, but she didn't stop to read it. She was already scanning faces, instinct kicking in. A guy in a Mets cap was hyperventilating, his hands shaking as he tried to call someone. Nia crouched beside him, her voice calm but firm. "Hey, look at me. Slow breaths, okay? In through your nose, out through your mouth." She pressed 2 fingers to his wrist, counting his pulse, her own heart thudding but her hands steady as ever. She'd lost a patient last month, a young woman, a stupid mistake with a chart, and the guilt still clung to her like damp clothes. But out here, she could move, she could help. The crowd surged as riot police poured in from 42nd Street, their boots pounding the asphalt in unison. Their visors caught the neon glow, turning their faces into blank, reflective masks. "Move! Inside now!" one shouted, his voice muffled but sharp, gesturing with a gloved hand toward the nearest buildings. People stumbled over curbs, bags spilling onto the pavement, lipstick, a kid's toy truck, a half-eaten pretzel. Nia got to her feet, pulling the Mets cap guy with her, when she felt the press of bodies funneling her toward a faded marquee. The Marquise Hotel, its letters flickering like they were on their last legs. Inside, the lobby smelled of old carpet and stale coffee, a far cry from the glitz of Times Square. The place was a ghost of its old self, once a hotspot for jazz singers and movie stars, now just a tired landmark with peeling gold trim and a chandelier that swayed slightly, its crystals clinking like ice in a glass. The crowd spilling in was a mess of nerves. A businessman in a rumpled suit muttering about a missed flight, a couple arguing in hushed Spanish, a teenage girl filming the chaos on her phone with shaky hands. Nia scanned the room, her nurse's brain cataloging details. Sweaty brows, darting eyes, a guy clutching his chest like he might keel over. Across the lobby, Caleb was already moving, his cab driver's instincts screaming to secure the space. He'd been dropping a fare nearby when the alert hit, and now here he was, stuck in this crumbling hotel. His jaw was tight, his flannel shirt sticking to his back as he hauled a heavy suitcase from a pile of abandoned luggage. The thing was leather, monogrammed, probably worth more than his rent. He wedged it against the glass doors, his scarred knuckles flexing, marks from a bar fight years ago, one he didn't like to talk about. "Nobody's getting through here," he grunted to no one in particular, his eyes flicking to the street outside, where shadows moved behind the police line. He didn't trust cops, didn't trust alerts, didn't trust the way the air felt too thick, like a storm was brewing inside the building. Mira was tucked against a wall, her knees pulled up, her sketchbook balanced on them. She was barely 20, a criminology student at NYU, her dark hair falling over her face as she scratched her pencil across the page. She always drew when her nerves got bad. It was better than biting her nails bloody. Right now, she was sketching the crowd. The businessman's furrowed brow, the teenage girl's wide eyes, Nia's steady hands as she checked another stranger's pulse. Each stroke was sharp, deliberate, like she was carving the moment into the paper. "Helps me think," she muttered when a woman nearby gave her a curious look, her voice soft but clipped. She didn't mention how her hands were shaking, or how the pencil felt like the only thing keeping her from screaming. Owen stood apart from the chaos, leaning against a marble pillar that was chipped at the edges. He was the hotel's janitor, his gray uniform wrinkled, a ring of keys jingling at his belt. His eyes were too sharp for the tired slump of his shoulders, darting from face to face like he was counting heads or looking for someone specific. His fingers kept brushing something under his sleeve, a nervous tick he didn't seem to notice. "Folks need to calm down," he said to a passing guest, his voice low, almost swallowed by the noise. "No good comes from running in circles." But he stayed put, his back to the pillar, watching the doors like he expected them to burst open. Lena was the odd one out, cool as ice in her crisp blazer, her heels clicking as she paced near the check-in desk. She was a lawyer, mid-30s, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun that didn't have a strand out of place. Her phone was glued to her hand, thumbs flying as she typed, her face lit by the screen's glow. "They'll sort this out," she said to a nervous man nearby, her tone so steady it sounded rehearsed. "These alerts happen, posturing mostly. Stay put and we'll be fine." But her eyes didn't lift from her phone, and when the man shuffled away, she tapped out another message, her lips pressing into a thin line. Isaac was the last to slip in, unnoticed by most. He was a homeless veteran, his army jacket patched at the elbows, his hair matted from weeks on the street. He crouched by a vent near the back of the lobby, his fingers tracing the grate like it might tell him something. "Faces watching," he whispered, his voice barely audible, his eyes fixed on nothing. He'd been in Times Square when the alert hit, ignored by the crowd until the police herded him inside. Now he rocked slightly, his boots scuffing the floor, muttering about a clinic he'd stumbled into once, a place with wrong air. Nobody paid him much mind, another lost soul in a city full of them. The chandelier above flickered, its light stuttering like a bad heartbeat. Shadows stretched across the lobby's worn carpet, moving slower than they should, almost like they were reaching. A woman in a yellow scarf gasped, her phone slipping from her hand as it rang, a shrill, old-fashioned tone that didn't match the sleek device. She stared at the screen, her face draining of color. That's me," she stammered, her voice breaking as the screen flashed an image, her own face, but wrong, eyes too wide, mouth twitching like it was trying to speak. She screamed, a raw, jagged sound that silenced the room for a split second. People backed away, whispering, as she sank to her knees, clutching her phone like it might burn her. Nia was at her side in an instant, kneeling on the gritty carpet. "Hey, stay with me," she said, her voice soft but urgent, like she was talking down a patient in the ER. She pried the phone from the woman's grip, tossing it aside. It landed with a dull thud, the screen still glowing faintly. "What's your name? Can you tell me?" The woman just shook her head, her breath hitching, her fingers digging into her own arms. Nia glanced around, catching Caleb's eye. "Help me move her, over there by the couch." Caleb hesitated, his hands flexing, but he nodded, hauling the woman up with a grunt. "This is messed up," he muttered, his voice rough, like he was swallowing gravel. Outside, the chaos was louder now. Shouts, the screech of tires, and then a sharp crack of gunshots that made everyone flinch. The sound was gone as fast as it came, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Nia edged toward a window, her sneakers silent on the floor, and lifted a corner of the cracked blind. Her breath caught in her throat. A man stood in the street, maybe 30 feet away, his silhouette stark against the neon glow. He was swaying, his head jerking like a broken puppet, his face twitching, like it couldn't decide what shape to hold. He took a step, then another, and collapsed, his body hitting the pavement with a wet smack. "Something's wrong," Nia whispered, her voice tight, her fingers gripping the blind so hard it creaked. That wasn't a gunshot wound. Caleb was at the doors now, piling another suitcase onto his makeshift barricade, his movements quick but deliberate. "Damn cops probably shot him," he spat, though his eyes lingered on the street, uncertain. Or something else. He kicked a chair into place, its legs scraping the floor with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. "Nobody's getting in here till we know what's what." But his hands were shaking now, just a little, and he shoved them into his pockets when he caught Nia looking. Mira was still sketching, her pencil moving faster now, capturing the man outside before he'd fallen, his twisted posture, the way his hands had clawed at the air. Her breath was uneven, her lips pressed tight, but she didn't stop. "I saw him," she said to herself, so quiet it was almost lost in the room's hum. "I saw his face change." Her fingers trembled, smudging the lines, and she gripped the pencil harder, like it was an anchor. A woman nearby peeked over her shoulder, then backed away fast, muttering about bad vibes. The radio on the check-in desk hissed to life, spitting out the same alert. "Terrorist threat detected. Shelter in place." The voice was mechanical, but it had a buzz behind it, like a wasp trapped in a jar, needling at their nerves. Lena glanced up from her phone, her brow furrowing for the first time. "They need to update that," she said, her tone clipped, like she was annoyed at a barista getting her order wrong. "No new information, it's just scaring people." But she didn't move to turn it off, and her fingers kept tapping, her phone's light casting shadows under her eyes. A mirror on the far wall caught Nia's eye, its surface warped and speckled with age. For a second it looked like it fogged up, like someone had breathed on it, but nobody was standing close. She blinked, and it was clear again, reflecting the flickering chandelier. "Anyone else see that?" she asked, her voice louder than she meant, drawing a few nervous glances. Caleb snorted, not looking up from his barricade. "See what? This place is falling apart. Probably just the AC." But his shoulders tensed, and he didn't turn toward the mirror. Footsteps echoed outside now, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing just beyond the doors. Owen moved first, his keys jangling as he crossed the lobby in long strides. "I'll check it," he said, his voice steady but his hand hovering near his sleeve again. He cracked the door open, just an inch, letting in a gust of cool air that smelled faintly of copper. The street was empty, the police lines still holding a block away, their flashlights cutting through the dark. But on the pavement, right outside the door, was a smear of blood, fresh, glistening, like someone had dragged a hand through it. Owen shut the door fast, his face pale but his voice even. "Nobody's there," he said, locking it with a click. "Must have been a stray mark." The group was huddling now, strangers pressed closer than they'd like, their breaths mixing in the stale air. Nia stood in the middle, her hands still but her mind racing. Gunshots, that man's face, the woman's phone. Something was off, worse than any alert could explain. Caleb leaned against his barricade, muttering curses under his breath, his eyes flicking to the windows. Mira's pencil scratched louder, her sketchbook filling with faces she didn't recognize. Lena typed faster, her calm cracking just enough to show a twitch in her jaw. Owen stayed by the door, his fingers brushing that spot under his sleeve, his gaze too sharp for comfort. Isaac rocked by the vent, his whispers growing softer, like he was talking to someone who wasn't there. The hotel's lights dimmed, just for a moment, plunging the lobby into a murky gray. The chandelier swayed harder, its clinks louder now, like a warning. And then from somewhere deep in the walls, behind the peeling wallpaper, under the creaking floorboards, came a sound, a whisper, soft as a child's breath, slipping through the cracks. "Stay." It was gone before anyone could pin it down, but the air felt heavier, like the hotel itself was listening, waiting for what they'd do next. The lobby's air was starting to feel thick, like it was pressing down on their shoulders, making every breath a little harder. Nia wiped her hands on her scrubs, her eyes scanning the group, already thinking about who might crack first. She didn't know it yet, but the Marquise Hotel was about to show them something far worse than a terrorist threat. Something that'd make them question the faces staring back from every mirror. The whisper still hung in the Marquise Hotel's lobby, that soft stay, echoing in their ears like a bad dream you can't shake. The air was heavier now, stale and warm, like the place hadn't been aired out in years. It pressed against their skin, made their clothes feel too tight, their breaths too shallow. The chandelier's flicker was slower, casting jagged shadows that seemed to linger on the walls, watching. The crowd from Times Square was thinning out. Some guests had slipped into side rooms, others huddled in tight knots, whispering about the gunshots, the alert, that smear of blood Owen had found outside. But for Nia, Caleb, Mira, Owen, Lena, and Isaac, there was no slipping away. They were stuck here, bound by something they couldn't name yet. Nia was already moving, her nurse's instincts kicking into overdrive. She'd found a first aid kit behind the check-in desk, half empty, its plastic case cracked, but better than nothing. She knelt on the gritty carpet, sorting through it. Gauze, a few bandages, a bottle of antiseptic that smelled sharp enough to sting her nose. Her hands were steady as she arranged the supplies, but every so often they'd tremble, just for a second, when her mind flashed to that patient she'd lost. The woman's gasp, the flatline's whine, it was a memory she couldn't outrun, no matter how busy she kept herself. "Anyone got water?" she called out, her voice cutting through the lobby's low hum. A guy in a Knicks jersey tossed her a half-empty bottle, and she caught it without looking up. "Thanks," she muttered, setting it beside the kit, already calculating how far it'd stretch if things got worse. Caleb was pacing near the barricaded doors, his boots scuffing the floor with every step. He was a big guy, broad shoulders, but the way he moved was restless, like a dog that sensed thunder coming. His eyes kept darting to a light bulb overhead, one that flickered like it was mocking him. "Piece of junk," he snapped, smacking the wall with his palm. The sound was sharp, making a few heads turn, but he didn't care. He was avoiding the mirrors, those warped, cloudy ones that lined the lobby like silent judges. Every time he passed one, he'd angle his body away, his scarred knuckles flexing in his pockets. "We're sitting ducks here," he said, loud enough for Nia to hear, though he wasn't looking at her. "Should have bolted when we had the chance." His voice had an edge, rough from years of shouting over city noise, but there was a crack in it, something raw he couldn't hide. Mira was still tucked against the wall, her sketchbook open on her lap, her pencil moving like it had a mind of its own. She was drawing a guest now, a middle-aged man with a mustache, his face pale as he whispered to his wife. Mira's lines were sharp, capturing the sweat on his brow, the way his hands twisted together. She didn't notice how her strokes were getting darker, heavier, like she was pressing too hard. "It's just something to do," she said when a woman nearby glanced at her, her voice small but firm, like she was defending herself. She shifted her weight, her sneakers squeaking on the floor, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Her fingers were smudged with graphite, and she wiped them on her jeans, leaving faint gray streaks. The sketchbook was her lifeline, the one thing keeping her heart from racing out of her chest, but she didn't look at the faces she'd drawn earlier. The ones from outside, the ones that felt too real. Owen was hovering near the staircase, his janitor's uniform blending into the lobby's dimness. He was lean, almost wiry, with a face that looked older than it should, etched with lines from too many late nights. "We should check upstairs," he said, his voice low, like he was testing the idea. He was talking to no one in particular, but his eyes flicked to Naya, then Caleb, gauging their reactions. His hand kept drifting to his pocket, fingers brushing something there, a shape too small to make out, but he touched it like a talisman. Could be a way out, or at least a better spot to hole up. He shifted his weight, his keys jingling softly, and leaned against the banister, the wood creaking under his grip. There was something about the way he stood, too still, like he knew more about this place than he was letting on. Lena was still pacing by the check-in desk, her heels clicking in a steady rhythm that felt out of place in the chaos. Her blazer was pristine, her phone glowing as she typed, her face calm in a way that made Caleb's skin crawl. He shot her a glare, his jaw tight, but she didn't look up. "You gonna put that thing down?" he called, his voice sharp like he was picking a fight. Lena's fingers paused, just for a second before she kept typing. "It's keeping me sane," she said, her tone cool, like she was explaining something to a child. "And it might get us answers." She didn't elaborate, didn't meet his eyes, just kept her focus on the screen, her lips twitching into a half-smile that didn't reach her face. Caleb muttered something under his breath, too low to catch, and turned back to his pacing, his boots louder now, like he was trying to drown her out. Isaac was in his corner, crouched by the vent, his army jacket bunched around him like a shield. He rocked back and forth, his boots scraping the floor, his whispers barely audible over the lobby's noise. "Wrong faces," he muttered, his voice hoarse, like he'd been talking for hours. "Saw him in that clinic, poking me with needles, saying it'd help." His fingers traced the vent's grate, slow and deliberate, like he was reading something in the metal. Nobody paid him much attention. Nia glanced his way once, her brow furrowing, but she was too busy with her supplies to linger. Isaac's eyes were distant, fixed on the air in front of him, like he could see something the rest of them couldn't. "They put something in me," he whispered, softer now, his hands trembling as he gripped his knees. The lobby's hum was growing louder, a faint buzz that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, like the walls themselves were humming. It matched the flicker of the lights, the slow sway of the chandelier, and it was starting to get under everyone's skin. A man near the doors, Mr. Harper, Nia had heard him called, was standing by one of the mirrors, his reflection warped in the cloudy glass. He was older, maybe 60, with a tweed jacket and a nervous habit of adjusting his glasses. He'd been quiet until now, but something about the mirror held him, his eyes locked on his own face. "That's not right," he mumbled, his voice shaky, barely loud enough to hear. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the glass, and then he froze, his hands dropping to his sides. Nia was the first to notice, her head snapping up from her supplies. "Sir, you okay?" she called, already moving toward him, her sneakers silent on the carpet. But before she could reach him, Mr. Harper's reflection started to change. It was subtle at first, a ripple in the glass, like heat rising off pavement. Then his face began to shift, his skin stretched tight, his eyes sank into dark hollows, his mouth twisted into something too small, too wrong. It wasn't his face anymore. It was a girl's, pale, bruised, her hair matted with blood. Harper screamed, a raw animal sound that tore through the lobby and clawed at his own face, his nails digging red furrows into his skin. Blood dripped onto the carpet, pooling around his shoes as he collapsed, his body twitching like a broken toy. His face was hers now, frozen in a look of pure terror, her eyes wide and unblinking. Nia dropped to her knees beside him, her hands shaking as she pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Come on," she whispered, searching for a pulse, but there was nothing, just cold skin and that awful staring face. She leaned back, her breath hitching, when his eyes flicked to her, sharp and alive, locking onto hers like they could see right through her. She scrambled back, her heart pounding so hard it hurt, her scrubs sticking to her sweat-damp skin. He's gone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried in the sudden silence. Mira was on her feet now, her sketchbook clutched to her chest, her pencil rolling across the floor. She stared at Harper's body, her breath coming in short gasps. "I know her," she said, her voice cracking, loud enough to draw every eye. "That girl, she was on a missing poster outside my dorm. This morning, I swear." She fumbled with her sketchbook, flipping to a page she'd drawn earlier, her hands trembling so bad the paper shook. It was the same face, pale, bruised, unmistakable. "How is this happening?" she asked, looking at Nia, then Caleb, like they might have answers. Nobody did. Panic hit the lobby like a match to dry grass. People shouted, shoving toward the doors, only to find Caleb's barricade holding firm. "We gotta get out!" a woman in a yellow scarf screamed, the same one whose phone had freaked her out earlier. Caleb spun on her, his face red, his hands balled into fists. "Run where?" he yelled, his voice booming. "You saw what's out there? You want to end up like him?" He jabbed a finger at Harper's body, his chest heaving. The woman shrank back, tears streaking her face, but others kept pushing, their voices a jumbled mess of fear. Lena stepped forward, her heels clicking, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Everyone, stop!" she said, her tone so steady it was almost unnerving. "Running blind won't help. We need to stay calm, figure out what's happening." She stood tall, her blazer catching the chandelier's flicker, her phone still in her hand but dark now. Caleb glared at her, his jaw working like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. Something about her calm made him hesitate, like he wasn't sure if she was right or just too slick for her own good. The lights buzzed louder, a harsh drone that made teeth ache, and the PA system crackled to life. Static poured out, thick and grating, but beneath it was something else, a sound like a sob, soft and broken, like someone crying just out of sight. It lasted only a second before the system cut off, leaving the lobby in a hush. Nia was on her feet now, her supplies forgotten, her eyes scanning the group. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice firm despite the shake in her hands. "Not with that." She nodded at Harper's body, her stomach twisting at the sight of that girl's face. So wrong on his frame. Before anyone could argue, another guest, A waiter, young, with a name tag that read Eddie, stumbled toward Harper's body. He'd been hovering nearby, his tray of coffee cups long abandoned, his face pale as he muttered about needing to help. "I got first aid training," he said, his voice high like he was trying to convince himself. He knelt beside Harper, reaching for his arm, but the second his fingers brushed the dead man's skin, he froze. His eyes widened, his breath stopped, and his face began to change. It was faster this time. His cheeks sagged, his eyes clouded, his mouth stretched into a trembling line. It was an old woman's face now, her skin thin and wrinkled, her expression one of quiet betrayal. "You forgot me," Eddie whispered, his voice not his own, soft and accusing. He lurched to his feet, turned, and smashed his head against the wall, the crack of bone echoing like a gunshot. He slid to the floor, blood pooling, his face still hers, staring blankly at the ceiling. The lobby erupted again, screams bouncing off the walls, people tripping over each other to get away. Nia grabbed Mira's arm, pulling her toward the staircase, her heart hammering. "Move," she shouted, her voice raw. Caleb was already there, shoving people aside, his barricade forgotten. Owen followed, his keys jingling, his face pale but his steps steady, like he'd seen worse. Lena hesitated, her eyes flicking to Eddie's body, then Harper's, before she joined them, her phone clutched tight. Isaac was last, scrambling to his feet, his whispers louder now. Wrong faces, as he trailed behind, his boots dragging. They hit the staircase running, their boots pounding the worn steps, the wood groaning under their weight. The lobby's chaos faded behind them, replaced by the echo of their own breaths, their own fear. Doors slammed shut below, loud and unprompted, like the hotel was sealing them in. They reached the second floor, spilling into a hallway that stretched out like a tunnel, its wallpaper curling at the edges, yellowed and damp. Scratches marked the plaster beneath, thin and jagged, like someone had clawed at it in a panic. The air was colder here, sharp with the smell of mildew and something metallic, like old blood. Mira clutched her sketchbook, her knuckles white, her eyes darting to the mirrors that lined the hall. They were smaller than the lobbies, but just as warped, their surfaces catching the dim light from flickering sconces. For a second, she thought she saw something in one. Not her face, but someone else's, pale and fleeting, gone when she blinked. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice shaking, looking at Nia. Nia shook her head, but her hand was on Caleb's arm, steadying him as he swayed, his face slick with sweat. "Keep moving," Nia said, her tone sharp, like she was holding herself together by force of will. Caleb yanked his arm away, too fast, his eyes wild. "Don't touch me," he snapped, his voice low, almost a growl, before he caught himself and looked away, his hands shaking. The hallway hummed, a faint pulse that seemed to match their heartbeats, vibrating through the walls, the floor, their bones. It wasn't loud, but it was constant, like a machine idling just out of sight. Naya's scar, the one from a childhood burn hidden under her sleeve, itched for the first time in years, a sharp, nagging sting that made her wince. She rubbed it absently, her eyes scanning the hall, catching every detail, the scuffed baseboards, the cobwebs in the corners, the way the carpet sank under their feet like it was wet. Something moved in the shadows ahead, a shape, human but wrong, its edges too soft, like it was melting into the dark. Mira gasped, her sketchbook slipping from her hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud. She spun around, her breath hitching, but there was nothing there, just the empty hallway and their own reflections in the mirrors. "I saw it," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her hands trembling as she bent to grab her book. Nia put a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "Stay with me, okay?" she said, her voice softer now, like she was talking to a scared kid in the ER. Mira nodded, but her eyes kept flicking to the shadows, like she wasn't sure what was real anymore. The hotel felt alive, its walls watching, its air thick with secrets. A scream echoed from somewhere below, high, desperate, cut off mid-breath. It was distant, muffled by floors and doors, but it hit them like a punch, freezing them in place. Caleb's hands balled into fists, his breath ragged. "We're not alone up here," he said, his voice low, like he didn't want to be right. Nia nodded, her jaw tight, her mind racing. Harper, Eddie, that thing in the shadows. Whatever was happening, it was spreading, and they were running out of time to figure out why. The hallway stretched on, its hum growing louder, its mirrors glinting like eyes in the dark. Naya took a step forward, her sneakers silent on the carpet, her heart pounding but her resolve hardening. They needed answers, and sitting still wasn't an option anymore. The second floor was just the start. Something was waiting for them, deeper in the hotel, and it wasn't going to let them go easy. The scream from below still rang in their ears, sharp and cut off, like someone had clapped a hand over a mouth. The second floor hallway felt tighter now, its curling wallpaper and flickering mirrors closing in like a trap. The group stood frozen for a moment, their breaths loud in the silence, the hum in the walls pulsing faster, like a heartbeat picking up speed. Nia's scar, that old burn from a childhood accident hidden under her sleeve, itched fiercely, a nagging sting that made her rub it absently. She shook it off, her jaw tightening, her nurse's resolve kicking in like a second skin. "We can't just stand here," she said, her voice low but steady, cutting through the group's haze. "Whatever's happening, it's not stopping. We need to move." Caleb was pacing again, his boots scuffing the damp carpet, his flannel shirt dark with sweat. His face was slick, his eyes wild, like he was one loud noise away from swinging. "Move where?" he snapped, his voice rough, echoing off the walls. He stopped by a window, its glass streaked with grime, and slammed his fist against it, testing the frame. The pane rattled but didn't give, solid as steel. "We break this. We're out. Done with this freak show." He hit it again, harder, his knuckles leaving a faint smear of sweat, but the glass just stared back, unyielding. He cursed under his breath, a string of words that would have made a sailor blush, and turned to Nia, his chest heaving. "You got a better idea, Doc?" Nia didn't flinch at the jab, though her hands clenched for a second. "Breaking a window's no good if we don't know what's waiting out there," she said, her tone calm but firm, like she was talking down a patient in the ER. "You saw that guy in the street, Caleb. That wasn't normal. We need answers, not a blind jump." She glanced at the others, her eyes scanning their faces. Mira's wide stare, Owen's too still posture, Lena's cool detachment, Isaac's trembling hands. They were a mess, but they were all she had. "We find a way out, but we do it smart." Mira was leaning against the wall, her sketchbook clutched to her chest, her sneakers scuffing the carpet as she shifted her weight. She'd been sketching again, her pencil moving in quick, sharp strokes, trying to anchor herself in the chaos. But now, as she flipped through her pages, she noticed something. Her drawings were clearer, almost too detailed, like she'd captured every pore, every shadow. The face she'd drawn last, a guest from the lobby, seemed to stare back at her, its eyes sharper than she remembered sketching. "This is weird," she muttered, her voice barely audible, her breath catching as she traced the lines with a trembling finger. I didn't draw this good before." She looked up, catching Nia's eye, her face pale. "It's like the pencil knows something I don't." Owen cleared his throat, breaking the tension, his keys jingling as he shifted his weight. He was standing by a fire exit door, its paint chipped and faded, his hand brushing that spot under his sleeve again. "There's an old exit in the basement," he said, his voice low, like he was sharing a secret he wasn't sure he should tell. "Service tunnels, from back when this place was new, might still be clear." His eyes flicked to the floor, avoiding theirs, and he adjusted his stance, his boots creaking on the carpet. "I can get us there, if you're up for it." There was something about the way he said it, too casual, like he'd rehearsed it, that made Nia's stomach twist, but she didn't call it out. Not yet. Lena looked up from her phone, her thumbs pausing mid-text, her blazer catching the flicker of a sconce. "Basement sounds better than waiting for whatever's screaming down there," she said, nodding at Owen, her tone as cool as ever. But her eyes were sharper now, darting to the mirrors, to the shadows, like she was cataloging every detail. Her phone buzzed in her hand, a soft vibration that made Caleb glare, but she ignored it, slipping the device into her pocket with a practiced ease. "Let's go," she said, her heels clicking as she stepped toward Owen, like she was leading a boardroom meeting, not a desperate escape. Isaac was last, still crouched by the wall, his army jacket bunched around him like armor. He'd been muttering the whole time, his voice a low drone that blended with the hallway's hum. "Faces they gave us," he whispered, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the carpet. "In the needles, in the dark, they gave 'em to me." He looked up as Naya passed, his eyes glassy but sharp, like he saw something she couldn't. "You'll see 'em too," he said, his voice barely a breath, before he scrambled to his feet, trailing behind like a shadow, his boots dragging with every step. The group moved fast, their footsteps echoing as they hit the stairwell to the basement. The air grew colder with every step, thick with the smell of rust and damp stone. The stairs creaked under their weight, each groan loud enough to make Mira flinch, her sketchbook tucked under her arm like a shield. Owen led the way, his flashlight, pulled from a loop on his belt, cutting through the dark, its beam bouncing off pipes that dripped in steady, plinking rhythms. "Watch your step," he said, his voice echoing too loud in the tight space. "These haven't been cleaned in years." He moved with an ease that felt wrong, like he'd walked this path 100 times, his keys jingling softly as he turned a corner. The basement was a maze of concrete corridors, lined with rusted pipes that hissed and gurgled like they were alive. The walls were streaked with black mold, the air heavy with a sour metallic tang that stuck in their throats. Caleb coughed, his hand covering his mouth, his eyes watering as he lagged behind. "This place is a death trap," he muttered, his voice muffled, his hands clammy as he gripped the wall for balance. Naya glanced back, her brow furrowing, but she didn't stop. She couldn't, not with that scream still echoing in her head. Owen stopped at a steel door, its surface pitted with rust but solid, etched with a faint logo, a snake biting its tail, carved so deep it caught the flashlight's beam. Mira's breath caught, her sneakers skidding as she froze. "I've seen that," she said, her voice shaking, her eyes wide as she stared at the symbol. "A documentary, some sketchy lab, shut down years ago. They were messing with, I don't know, brain stuff, chemicals." She looked at Owen, her hands tightening on her sketchbook. "What is this place?" Owen didn't answer, just pushed the door open, its hinges screaming like a wounded animal, revealing a room that didn't belong in a hotel basement. Inside was a makeshift lab, gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry bees. Stainless steel tables lined the walls, cluttered with vials of silvery liquid that shimmered like mercury, catching the light in ways that hurt to look at. Monitors glowed in one corner, showing grainy footage of Times Square crowds, people laughing, arguing, oblivious, recorded from angles that felt too close, too invasive. Stacks of files were scattered across a desk, their edges yellowed but their contents pristine. Photos clipped to pages with faces circled in red ink. Naya's stomach dropped as she recognized some of them, strangers they'd passed in the lobby, in the street, their eyes staring out from the paper like ghosts. Nia grabbed a file, her hands trembling as she flipped it open. Her own name stared back at her, typed in crisp black letters. Nia Carter. No photo, no details, just a question mark scrawled in the margin, the ink still fresh enough to smudge under her thumb. "What the hell is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking, her scar itching so bad she had to grip the desk to keep from scratching it raw. She looked up, her eyes locking on Lena, who was standing too still, her face tight. "You know something," Nia said, not a question, her voice sharp enough to cut. Lena's lips parted just for a second before she spoke. "I consulted for them," she said, her voice low, almost swallowed by the lab's buzz. "A firm, years ago. Paperwork, contracts, nothing more." She crossed her arms, her blazer creasing, her eyes flicking to the floor like she couldn't hold Nia's gaze. Her phone buzzed again, louder this time, vibrating against the steel table where she'd set it down. She didn't reach for it, but her fingers twitched like the urge was there. "I didn't know it was this," she added, but the words felt hollow, like she was reading from a script she didn't believe. Mira's sketchbook slipped from her hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud, its pages fanning open. She gasped, kneeling to grab it, her breath hitching as she saw the face she'd drawn last week. A man, gaunt, his eyes circled in red ink in one of the files. "I didn't know." She stammered, her voice breaking as she held up the page, her hands shaking so bad the paper rattled. "This was just a guy I saw on the subway. I didn't know he was here." She looked at Naya, then Owen, her eyes pleading for someone to make sense of it. "How did I draw this?" Caleb was backing away, his boots scuffing the concrete, his hands clammy as he wiped them on his jeans. "This is a trap," he shouted, his voice bouncing off the walls, raw with panic. "They're playing us all of this." He gestured wildly at the lab, the monitors, the vials, his face slick with sweat, his eyes darting like a cornered animal's. He bumped into a table, knocking over a vial that rolled nowhere, just spun in place, its silvery liquid catching the light like a trapped star. The air thickened, the metallic tang sharper now, stinging their noses, making their eyes water. The monitors flickered, their screens glitching with static that formed shapes, eyes, mouths, fragments of faces that melted away before they could focus. A pipe overhead groaned, loud and sudden, spraying steam that hissed like a snake, clouding the room in a damp haze. Footsteps thudded above, heavy, uneven, like someone dragging a body across the floor. Nia's heart pounded, her scar burning now, a white-hot itch that made her grit her teeth. She slammed the file shut, the sound sharp in the quiet, her hands shaking, but her voice steady. "We're not staying here," she said, looking at each of them, her eyes fierce. "Grab what you can, and we move." Owen was by the door, his flashlight shaking slightly, his keys silent for once. "There's no exit here," he admitted, his voice low, like he hated saying it. "But there's another way, through the service halls." He didn't meet their eyes, his hand brushing that spot under his sleeve again, harder this time, like he was trying to rub something away. Lena nodded, grabbing her phone, its screen flashing with unread messages, before she shoved it into her pocket. Mira clutched her sketchbook, her knuckles white, her breath shallow as she backed toward Nia. Isaac was muttering again, louder now, his words clearer. "They gave us faces, but they didn't say whose." He shuffled closer, his eyes glassy, his hands trembling like he was fighting to hold himself together. The lab's lights pulsed, dimming and flaring in time with the hum, like the room was breathing. One of the monitors flickered again, static clearing for just a second, to flash a single word in bold red letters. Guilt. It was gone as fast as it came, but it hit them like a slap, freezing them in place. The basement door rattled, a slow, deliberate shake, like something was testing it, wanting in. Nia's scar burned hotter, her vision blurring for a second, but she shook it off, her voice cutting through the panic. "Now," she shouted, shoving past Caleb, her sneakers pounding the concrete as she led them back into the dark. The service halls loomed ahead, their shadows swallowing the group as they ran, the hum louder now, like a pulse that wouldn't stop. Nia's scar was a fire under her skin, her mind racing with what she'd seen, her name, that lab, the faces that weren't theirs. Whatever was in this hotel, it knew them, and it wasn't letting go without a fight. The basement door's rattle still echoed in their ears as the group stumbled back into the hotel's service halls, their footsteps slapping the cold concrete in a messy, desperate rhythm. The hum was louder now, no longer a background drone but a pulse that throbbed in their chests, like the marquise itself was alive and angry. The air was thick, damp with the smell of rust and something sweeter, almost sickly, like rotting fruit. Nia led the way, her sneakers squeaking on the slick floor, her scar burning under her sleeve like a coal pressed to her skin. She fought to keep her head clear, but memories of her patient, those pleading eyes, that final, choking gasp, kept clawing their way back, threatening to drown her focus. "We need a radio," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, loud enough to pull the others along. "Something to reach outside, get help." She didn't look back, couldn't afford to see their faces, fearful, doubtful, breaking. Caleb was lagging, his boots dragging like they were stuck in mud, his flannel shirt soaked through with sweat that glistened in the dim light. His face was pale, almost gray, and he kept his hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders hunched like he was trying to shrink away from the world. Every time Nia or Mira got too close, he'd flinch, stepping sideways, his eyes darting to the shadows instead of their faces. "Don't crowd me," he muttered once, his voice rough, barely audible over the hum when Mira brushed past him. His breath was uneven, hitching like he was fighting a cough or something worse. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve, leaving a smear of damp, and glanced at a cracked mirror on the wall, only to jerk his head away fast, like he'd seen something he didn't want to name. Mira was clutching her sketchbook so tight her knuckles were white, her pencil scratching across the page as they moved, her movements frantic, almost compulsive. She was drawing faces now, strangers, people she didn't know, their eyes too sharp, their mouths twisted in ways that made her stomach churn. "I don't even remember these," she whispered, her voice shaking as she flipped a page, her sneakers scuffing the floor. She paused, leaning against a pipe that hissed with steam, her breath catching as she stared at a sketch of a woman with hollow cheeks, her expression frozen in a silent scream. "This wasn't from today," she said, louder now, looking at Nia with wide, pleading eyes. "I drew this last month, I swear, but she's here." Her fingers trembled, smudging the graphite, and she snapped the book shut, hugging it like it might protect her from whatever was coming. Owen was just ahead, his keys jingling softly as he gripped them in his fist, his calm starting to crack like old paint. His janitor's uniform was rumpled now, stained with sweat and grime from the basement, and his eyes kept flicking to the ceiling like he expected it to cave in. "There's an office up here," he said, his voice quieter than before, strained, like he was forcing the words out. "Old manager's room might have something we can use." He didn't mention the lab, didn't mention that snake logo or the files, but his hand kept brushing that spot under his sleeve, harder now, like he was trying to scrub it clean. Nia caught the movement, her eyes narrowing, but she didn't call him out. Not yet. She just nodded, her jaw tight, and kept moving, her flashlight beam cutting through the dark like a knife. Lena was a step behind, her heels clicking unevenly, her cool lawyer's facade starting to fray. Her phone glowed in her hand, its screen flashing with unread messages that lit up her face in sharp, cold light. She wasn't typing anymore, just staring at the notifications, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Battery's dying," she muttered, more to herself than anyone. Her voice clipped, like she was annoyed at the inconvenience. But her fingers tightened on the phone, and when Caleb shot her a look, his eyes burning with something close to hate, she didn't meet it, just kept walking, her shoulders stiff. "We'll find something," she said, echoing Naya's call for a radio, but it sounded hollow, like she was trying to convince herself. Isaac trailed at the back, his army jacket swishing as he shuffled along, his mutters growing clearer, more urgent. "They put it in me," he said, his voice hoarse, like he'd been screaming inside his head for years. "In the needles, in that clinic, they put it in me." He was talking to no one, or maybe to the walls, his hands twitching at his sides, his eyes glassy but sharp, like he was seeing something the rest couldn't. When Nia glanced back, he caught her gaze, his face twisting with something like desperation. "You ever feel it?" he asked, his voice low, almost a plea. "Something under your skin, moving?" She didn't answer, couldn't, but her scar burned hotter, and she turned away, her heart pounding. The service halls opened into a wider corridor, its carpet matted and stained, its walls lined with doors that looked like they hadn't been opened in decades. Owen led them to one marked Manager, its brass plaque tarnished but intact. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a dusty office that smelled of mildew and old paper. A desk sat in the center, cluttered with pens, a rotary phone, and stacks of yellowed invoices. A radio, ancient, its dials cracked, sat on a shelf, its antenna bent like a broken finger. Naya made a beeline for it, her sneakers silent on the gritty floor, her hands steady as she twisted the knob. Static hissed out, loud and grating, like a swarm of insects trapped in the speaker. She turned the dial slowly, her brow furrowing, searching for a signal, but all she got was noise, until, faint and warped, voices slipped through, saying their names. Naya, Caleb, Mira. The words were soft, layered under the static, like whispers from a dream. Nia froze, her hand on the dial, her breath catching as her own name echoed again, clearer this time, in a voice that sounded too much like her mother's. Caleb's head snapped up, his eyes wide, his hands shaking as he backed toward the wall. "That's not right," he said, his voice raw, like he was choking on the words. Mira clutched her sketchbook tighter, her pencil falling to the floor with a soft clatter, her face pale as she stared at the radio. "How do they know us?" she whispered, her voice breaking, her eyes darting to the door like she expected someone to burst through. Before anyone could answer, the PA system roared to life, its crackle filling the office like a storm. A lullaby poured out, slow and haunting, its melody familiar in a way that made their skin crawl. It was the kind of tune you'd hear from a music box, but the voices singing it weren't strangers. They were mothers, friends, people they'd lost. Nia heard her patients hum, soft and broken, from nights in the hospital. Mira caught her grandmother's voice, the one who'd taught her to draw. Caleb froze, his breath stopping, as a cough cut through the melody. Not just any cough, but his, The man he'd hit with his cab years ago, the one he'd left bleeding on the asphalt. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible, his hands clawing at his ears like he could block it out. "Not him. Not now." The lullaby stopped mid-note, plunging the room into silence, but the air felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. A guest burst through the door, a man, wild-eyed, his shirt torn, his face already starting to shift. His skin stretched, his eyes sank, and in seconds it was a boy's face, no older than 10, his cheeks smeared with dirt, his expression one of raw betrayal. "You left!" he screamed, lunging at Mira, his hands clawing the air. Mira yelped, stumbling back, her sketchbook hitting the floor as she tripped over a chair. Nia moved fast, shoving the man hard, her shoulder slamming into his chest. He staggered, his touch grazing her arm, and pain seared through her like fire, leaving a mark. Not a burn, but a scar, raised and raw, shaped like a scream frozen in skin. The man collapsed, his boy's face staring blankly, his chest still. Nia clutched her arm, her breath ragged, her scar pulsing under her sleeve like it was answering the new mark. "What was that?" she gasped, looking at Mira, who was scrambling to her feet, her hands shaking as she grabbed her sketchbook. Mira's eyes widened as she patted the man's pockets, her fingers brushing a crumpled paper. She pulled it out, unfolding it with trembling hands, a lab note scrawled in hasty ink. "Carrier 0, active." The words hit like a punch, and Caleb's head snapped up, his face draining of what little color it had left. "I touched him," he said, his voice hollow, his eyes wide as he stared at his hands, like they weren't his anymore. "Downstairs, I helped move him." His face flickered then. Not a full shift, but a ripple, like a reflection in troubled water. For a second, it wasn't Caleb's rough jaw, his tired eyes. It was another man's, older, his mouth snarling. "You ran." Caleb collapsed to his knees, a sob tearing out of him, raw and broken. "It's me," he said, his voice cracking, his hands clawing at his face like he could rip the truth away. "I killed him, and now it's me." The group recoiled, stepping back, their eyes wide with fear. Realization hitting them like ice water. He was spreading it, his guilt blinding him to the way his hands shook, the way he dodged every mirror since the lobby. Isaac lunged forward, grabbing Naya's arm, his grip surprisingly strong, his face flickering. Not his own, but a soldier's, younger, his eyes bloodshot and desperate. "I killed them," he said, his voice clear now, each word a wound. "My squad in the desert. Mistake, bad call, I don't know, but they're dead because of me." His touch didn't burn, didn't scar, but his eyes begged for something, forgiveness, punishment, release. Naya pulled away gently, her heart twisting, her scar throbbing like it was screaming for both of them. "Isaac, stop," she said, her voice soft but firm, like she was talking down a patient mid-panic. "You're still here, you're still you." The walls pulsed faster, their hum a roar now, and a silvery sheen oozed from the cracks, glistening like liquid metal. It formed words on the plaster: "See me," faint at first, then bold, glowing for a second before sinking back into the wall. Mirrors along the corridor cracked, their glass splintering with sharp, tinkling sounds, reflecting nothing, not even the flickering sconces. A scream echoed from below, raw and wet, like someone's face was melting mid-cry, cut off by a gurgle that made Mira gag. Lena's phone slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a crack, its screen flashing a single text: "Contain the carrier." She backed away, her heels scraping, her cool mask shattered as she shook her head. "I didn't send that," she said, her voice high, almost pleading, but nobody believed her. Caleb lunged, his face flickering again, his hands reaching for Lena, grazing her arm before Nia yanked him back. "Stop it!" Nia shouted, her voice breaking, her scar searing as she held him down, his strength fading as he sobbed, his face his own again, for now. The hallway tilted, not really but it felt like it, the light strobing in sharp, dizzying bursts, making shadows dance like they were alive. At the corridor's end, a shape flickered, tall, faceless, its edges blurring like smoke, there 1 second, gone when Naya blinked. Her breath caught, her heart hammering, but she didn't say it out loud. Didn't need to. Not with the way Mira's eyes widened, her sketchbook trembling in her hands. The office felt like a cage now, its walls too close, its air too thick to breathe. Naya let go of Caleb, her hands shaking, her scar a fire that wouldn't quit. They couldn't stay here, not with the walls screaming, not with Caleb breaking, not with that shape waiting in the dark. She stood, her sneakers planted firm, her voice steady despite the fear clawing her throat. "We're going up," she said, her eyes meeting each of theirs, daring them to argue. "To the roof. We end this, or it ends us." Nia's words still hung in the air. "We're going up to the roof," as the group staggered out of the office, the hallway's silvery sheen and cracked mirrors fading behind them like a bad dream. The hum was deafening now, a pulse that shook the walls, matching the thud of their hearts. Nia led the way, her sneakers pounding the carpet, her scar searing under her sleeve like a brand. Her patient's voice whispered in her head, "Fix it, fix it." A relentless loop that mixed with the memory of those pleading eyes, the flatline's whine. She clenched her jaw, forcing the guilt down, her flashlight beam slicing through the dark as she found the stairwell door, its paint peeling like dead skin. "Stay close," she said, her voice steady but tight, glancing back at the others. Mira's wide eyes, Caleb's slumped shoulders, Owen's tense grip, Lena's stiff walk, Isaac's trembling hands. They were falling apart, but she wouldn't let them break, not yet. Mira was right behind her, clutching her sketchbook like a lifeline, her breath hitching as she moved. Back in the office, she'd torn into the desk, yanking out wires from an old breaker box, her hands steady despite the fear in her gut. "If I can spark this right," she'd muttered to Nia, her voice low, "it might fry the hotel's systems, lights, PA, whatever's running this thing." She'd twisted the wires with her pencil, her fingers smudged with graphite and dust, rigging them to overload when they reached the roof. Now as she followed Nia, she kept glancing at her sketchbook, its pages warped from the damp air, the faces she'd drawn staring back like accusations. "I hope it works," she whispered, more to herself than anyone, her sneakers scuffing the floor, her hair sticking to her sweat-damp neck. Caleb was a wreck, tied up with a belt Mira had found in the office, his wrists bound behind him after his lunge at Lena. He stumbled along, Owen half dragging him, his face slick with sweat, flickering between his own rough jaw and the snarling man he'd killed years ago. "Just leave me," he begged, his voice raw, cracking like dry wood. "I'm poison, you see it, don't you?" His boots dragged, kicking up dust, and every few steps he'd jerk his head away from a mirror, his eyes wild with something deeper than fear, shame, maybe, or surrender. Nia glanced back, her stomach twisting, but she didn't answer. She couldn't, not when his touch could burn, could spread whatever was tearing them apart. Owen was on Caleb duty, his janitor's uniform stained with grime, his keys gone, lost or abandoned, nobody asked. In their place was a knife, a short, ugly thing with a chipped handle, glinting in his hand like he didn't care who saw it. "I'll keep him in line," he'd said back in the office, his voice flat, his eyes avoiding Nia's. Now, as he pulled Caleb along, his grip was too tight, his knuckles white, his calm fraying like a rope about to snap. He kept glancing at the walls, at the shadows, his free hand brushing that spot under his sleeve where he'd hidden something all night. "Move it," he muttered to Caleb, his voice low, almost a growl, but there was a tremor in it, like he was fighting his own demons. Lena followed, her heels clicking unevenly, her blazer wrinkled now, her phone dark in her hand. No more texts, no more glow, just a dead weight she hadn't dropped. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tight, and when she caught Nia's eye, she looked away fast, like she'd been caught stealing. "We're almost there," she said, her voice clipped, trying to sound like the lawyer who had it all together, but it cracked at the edges, betraying the fear she'd buried under her cool mask. She kept her distance from Caleb, her shoulders stiff, her hands twitching like she wanted to check her phone but knew it was useless. Isaac brought up the rear, limping now, his army jacket hanging loose on his frame. His soldier's face, the one that had flickered in the office, was fading, leaving his own tired eyes, but his hands shook like he was still carrying that ghost. "They're still with me," he muttered, his voice hoarse, his boots scuffing the floor. "My squad, I see 'em in the corners." He looked at Nia, his gaze sharp for a second, like he was begging her to understand. "You ever carry a mistake like that? Weighs more than you." Nia didn't answer, couldn't, but her scar throbbed, and she gripped her flashlight tighter, its beam shaking as they hit the stairwell. The stairwell to the roof was a death trap, its steps crumbling under their weight, chunks of concrete skittering down into the dark like pebbles in a well. The walls were slick, oozing a silvery liquid that hissed when it touched their skin, Nia yanked her hand back when a drop grazed her knuckles, the sting sharp enough to make her hiss. "Don't touch it," she snapped, her voice echoing, her flashlight catching the liquid's gleam, like it was alive, crawling toward them. Caleb stumbled, his bound hands useless, and Owen hauled him up, the knife flashing too close to Caleb's arm. "Watch it," Caleb growled, his voice weak but sharp, his face flickering again, the other man's sneer bleeding through. Halfway up, a door slammed shut below, the bang so loud it shook the walls, trapping Mira behind it. She'd been a step behind Nia, her sketchbook slipping from her grip, and now she pounded on the metal, her screams muffled but frantic. "Help! Something's here!" Her voice cracked, high and raw, and Nia spun around, her heart lurching as she shoved past Owen. She slammed her shoulder against the door, once, twice, her scar screaming with every hit. Mira's cries grew sharper, then stopped, replaced by a choked gasp. Nia kicked the door hard, her sneaker leaving a dent, and it finally gave, swinging open with a groan. Mira stumbled out, her face pale, her hands clutching her neck where something cold, wrong, not human had brushed her skin, leaving no mark but a tremor she couldn't shake. "It was there," she whispered, her eyes wide, darting to the dark behind her. "Hands, I swear." Nia grabbed her arm, pulling her close, her voice soft but firm. "You're with me now, okay? Stay with me." The PA system kicked in as they climbed, louder than ever, its crackle like bones snapping. That lullaby was back, but warped now, a choir of guilt. Mothers, friends, the dead, their voices blending into something that wasn't music anymore, just pain. Nia heard her patient's hum again, but it was angrier now, accusing. Caleb's victim's cough cut through, wet and final, making him freeze, his bound hands twitching like he could claw the sound away. Isaac's squad was there too, their shouts faint but sharp, like radio chatter from a war he'd never left. Mira's grandmother sang softly, her voice breaking mid-note, and Mira bit her lip so hard it bled, her sketchbook shaking in her hands. Lena's mother was last, a whisper too soft to catch, but Lena's face crumpled, just for a second, before she forced it back to stone. They burst onto the roof, the door slamming behind them, and the air hit like a slap, cold, heavy with the smell of tar and smoke. Times Square stretched below, silent for the first time in forever, its neon lights pulsing red like the city was bleeding. Billboards flickered, their ads replaced by static, faces flashing for a second. Strangers, loved ones, gone. The group stood at the edge, their breaths fogging in the night air, their shadows stretching too long across the gravel roof. Nia's scar throbbed, her patient's voice louder now. "Fix it, Nia, fix it." And she gripped the railing, its rust flaking under her palms, her eyes scanning the streets for any sign of rescue. Below, the infected swarmed, their movements jerky, unnatural, like puppets with cut strings. They scaled the hotel's walls, their hands clawing brick, their faces shifting, wives, sons, strangers, each one a memory that screamed as it climbed. A woman's face became a child's, mid-cry, her mouth stretched too wide. A man's shifted to an old friend's, his eyes pleading before they went blank. Their voices rose, a chorus of pain that drowned out the city's silence, each scream a knife to the gut. Caleb sank to his knees, his bound hands useless, his face flickering faster now, his victim's snarl winning. "I can't stop it," he whispered, his voice breaking, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. Owen moved fast, his knife flashing as he cut Caleb's bonds, the belt falling to the gravel with a soft thud. Caleb looked up, confused, but Owen's face was fervent, his eyes burning with something close to zeal. "I dosed the water," he said, his voice loud, almost proud, like he was confessing to a priest. "For months, every tank, every pipe. It's truth, don't you see? Guilt cleansed, laid bare." He stepped closer, the knife loose in his hand, his words tumbling out like a fever dream. "I saw it work, saw it free people, make them face it." His touch was poison, had been all along, and Nia's blood ran cold as she realized he wasn't a bystander. He was the source, or one of them, spreading it like a holy plague. Mira backed away, her sneakers crunching gravel, her sketchbook slipping from her hands as Owen turned toward her, his knife catching the red light. "You draw truth," he said, his voice soft but unhinged, stepping closer. "You see it, don't you?" Mira shook her head, her breath hitching, her hands raised like she could ward him off. Before he could lunge, Isaac moved, limping, slow, but sure, tackling Owen with a force that shouldn't have been in him. The knife sank into Isaac's chest, a wet, ugly sound, and he gasped, blood bubbling on his lips as he pinned Owen down, his soldier's face flickering one last time. "No more," Isaac whispered, his voice steady despite the pain, his eyes locked on Nia like he was passing her something heavy. He slumped still, his blood pooling on the gravel, Owen trapped beneath him, struggling but caught. Caleb was on his feet now, his face fully shifted, not his anymore, but his victim's, the man's snarl twisting his mouth as he charged Nia. "Join me," he whispered, his voice not his own, low and hungry, his hands reaching for her. Nia dodged, her sneakers skidding, her flashlight falling with a clatter, its beam spinning across the roof. His fingers grazed her arm, her scar exploding with pain, and for a second, her patient's face flickered in her vision, pleading, accusing, her eyes too wide. Nia stumbled, her breath ragged, but she caught herself on the railing, her hands shaking as she pushed the vision down. "Not yet," she hissed, her voice fierce, like she was fighting more than Caleb, fighting the hotel itself. Lena screamed, a raw, desperate sound, her phone flashing to life in her hand, its screen glowing with a single message, "Subject ends stable." She dropped it, the device skittering across the gravel, but the words burned into Nia's mind. Lena grabbed Nia's arm, her grip too tight, her eyes wild with something like guilt or fear. "I dosed you," she said, her voice breaking, the lawyer gone, just a woman now, spilling secrets. "Suppressants in the hospital, your shifts. You're safe, Nia, I swear." But her eyes betrayed her, darting to the side, her breath hitching like she'd said too much. Nia yanked her arm free, her scars screaming, her mind reeling. Her hospital, her patients, all a lab, all a lie. Lena had been testing her, using her infection a tool for whatever this was. The infected reached the roof, their hands clawing over the edge, their faces a mosaic of pain, shifting, screaming, each one a memory that wouldn't die. A man's face became a sister's, her laugh twisting into a wail. A child's turned to a father's, his eyes empty before they lunged. Their screams drowned out the PA's choir, the city's pulse, everything. Mira scrambled to the breaker box she'd rigged, her hands shaking as she twisted the wires, sparks flying with a sharp pop-pop. Flames licked the walls below, the hotel groaning like a wounded beast, smoke curling up in thick black tendrils that stung their eyes, shaped like eyes that watched, unblinking. The roof was chaos now, gravel crunching under scrambling feet, the air thick with heat and ash. Nia stood at the edge, her scar afire, her patient's voice a roar. "Fix it, Nia. End it." She looked at Caleb, at Owen, at Lena, at the infected climbing closer, their hands inches away, and knew there was no running from this, not anymore. The flames were spreading fast, the hotel's groans louder, like it was fighting to hold itself together. Nia's breath burned in her lungs, her scar pulsing with every heartbeat. But she didn't move, didn't break. Whatever came next, she'd face it head on, even if it meant facing herself. The rooftop was a furnace, flames licking the walls below, the air thick with smoke that stung their lungs and blurred their eyes. The hotel groaned like a dying beast, its hum now a scream that rattled the gravel under their feet. Nia stood at the edge, her sneakers inches from the drop, her scar searing like it was trying to burn through her skin. Her patient's voice roared in her head. "End it, Nia, end it." Louder than the fire, louder than the infected screams rising from the streets below. Her hands shook, her flashlight long gone, its beam swallowed by the dark. She could still see Caleb's face, his victim's face, flickering in her mind, his eyes begging for release, his guilt a mirror to her own. Caleb was crawling toward her now, his wrists raw from the belt that had bound him, his flannel shirt torn and soaked with sweat and blood. His face wasn't his anymore, not fully. It was the man he'd killed, the one he'd left bleeding on a rainy street years ago, his mouth twisted in a snarl that wasn't quite human. "Kill me," he rasped, his voice a broken mix of his own and the others, each word scraping out like glass on pavement. He reached for her, his fingers trembling, not to hurt her but to plead, his eyes locking onto hers with a desperation that cut deeper than any blade. Nia's breath hitched, her scar pulsing, and for a second she saw her patient in him. Those pleading eyes, that last breath she couldn't save. Her hand found the gun she'd taken from the office, its weight cold and heavy, tucked into her waistband. She didn't remember pulling it out, but there it was, shaking in her grip, the barrel aimed at Caleb's chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking, tears burning tracks down her soot-streaked face. She fired once, sharp, the sound swallowed by the hotel's roar. Caleb slumped, his body folding like a rag doll, the snarl softening back to his own face, tired and worn but finally at peace. His eyes stayed open, staring at the sky, and Nia sank to her knees beside him, the gun slipping from her hand to clatter on the gravel. "I tried," she said, her voice barely audible, her hands hovering over him like she could still fix it, like she could fix anything. The smoke curled around her, thick and choking, carrying the smell of tar and something metallic, like blood left too long in the sun. Mira was at the breaker box, her hands trembling as she twisted the wires she'd rigged, her sketchbook abandoned on the gravel, its pages fluttering in the heat. Come on," she muttered, her voice high and frantic, her fingers slick with sweat and grime. She glanced at Nia, her eyes wide with fear, but fierce with purpose, then jammed the wires together. Sparks flew, sharp pops that lit her face in bursts, and the hotel roared louder, a deep, guttural sound that shook the roof. Flames surged below, swallowing the basement, the lab, those vials of silvery liquid that shimmered like poison. The liquid boiled, rising as smoke that twisted into the air, forming a shape, a face, blank and screaming, its mouth a void that seemed to pull at the sky. It hung there for a second, silent but heavy, then dissolved, leaving nothing but ash and a faint, bitter taste on their tongues. The infected were still coming, their hands clawing over the roof's edge, their faces a shifting nightmare, wives, sons, strangers, each one a memory that screamed as it lunged. A woman's face became a brother's, his laugh twisting into a wail. A man's shifted to a mother's, her eyes pleading before they went blank. Their voices were a chorus of pain, raw and relentless, drowning out the fire's crackle. Nia staggered to her feet, her scar burning, her patient's voice still whispering, "End it." And for a moment, her own face felt wrong, like it was slipping. She saw it in her mind, her patient's face, pleading, superimposed over her own, her eyes too wide, her mouth too small. She swayed, her sneakers skidding toward the edge, the drop to Times Square's silent streets calling her like a promise. Mira saw it happen, saw Nia's stumble, and moved fast, her sneakers crunching gravel as she grabbed Nia's arm. "No," she shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos, raw and desperate. "You're enough, Nia. You hear me? You're enough." Her grip was fierce, her nails digging into Nia's skin, grounding her, pulling her back from the void. Nia blinked, her breath hitching, the patient's face fading, her own returning, tired, scarred, but hers. She clutched Mira's hand, her heart pounding, tears mixing with the ash on her face. "Okay," she whispered, her voice shaky but alive, leaning into Mira like she was the only thing real. The blast came then, a shockwave from Mira's spark that tore through the hotel, a deafening boom that sent heat and debris roaring upward. The infected were hurled back, their bodies crumpling like paper, some falling to the streets below, others slumping against the roof's edge, their faces frozen mid-shift. The fire surged, consuming the walls, the stairwell, the lab's secrets, its light painting Times Square in angry reds and oranges. Nia and Mira ducked, shielding each other, gravel biting their knees as the roof shook, threatening to give. The hum was gone, replaced by the fire's roar, but the air still felt heavy, like something was watching, waiting. Lena was nowhere, slipped away in the chaos, her heels silent now, her blazer a ghost in the smoke. Nia caught a glimpse of her near the stairwell door, her phone flashing one last time, its screen glowing with words, "Contagion detected, Brooklyn." Lena had called Nia safe, sworn the suppressants worked, but her smile back on the roof, sharp, knowing, said something else. Nia's scar pulsed, a dull ache now, and she remembered Lena's touch, her words, "You're safe." But safe wasn't the same as clean, and the truth hit like ice. Those suppressants hid something, a dormant seed, a carrier's curse, waiting for the next city, the next crowd. Lena was gone, her phone left behind, its screen dark now, but her shadow lingered, a question Nia couldn't answer. Helicopters buzzed in the distance, their blades chopping the air, their lights cutting through the smoke as they descended. Nia and Mira staggered to their feet, leaning on each other, their clothes torn, their faces streaked with ash and tears. The roof was a ruin, gravel scorched, bodies still, the hotel crumbling below. They made it to the stairwell, its steps half gone, and stumbled down, coughing, their hands gripping the railing's rust. Times Square greeted them like a tomb, its screens dark, its streets littered with debris, shattered glass, abandoned bags, a child's shoe lying alone. The neon was dead, the city silent, its pulse snuffed out. Mirrors lay shattered on the pavement, their shards reflecting nothing, not even the dawn creeping over the skyline. They walked, Nia's sneakers crunching glass, Mira's breath hitching as she clung to her arm. A whisper hissed behind them, Caleb's voice, soft but clear, "We see you." Nia froze, her scar throbbing, her shadow stretching too long across the street, almost another's, its edges wrong, like it was reaching for her. She didn't look back, couldn't, just kept moving, her hand tight on Mira's. Mira was tearing her sketchbook apart now, page by page, letting the faces scatter, strangers, ghosts, truths she couldn't carry. But one page escaped, caught by a gust, fluttering ahead. Nia saw it before Mira did, her own face, mouthless, staring, drawn in Mira's sharp lines, but not her hand. Mira gasped, reaching for it, but it was gone, swallowed by the street's shadows. Dawn broke, pale and cold, its light washing Times Square in grays and blues. News vans were already rolling in, their tires crunching debris, reporters shouting about a gas leak, their voices tinny through megaphones. Nia and Mira kept walking, past the choppers landing in ash, past the police lines forming, their visors glinting like they had that first night. Nia's scar pulsed, quieter now, but not gone, a reminder of what she carried, what she might still carry. The city's pulse was quickening again, stirring beneath her feet, like it knew something she didn't. They passed a rebuilt billboard, its frame warped but standing, its screen flickering to life as power crept back. A face flashed, not Nia's, but her patient's, smiling too wide, her eyes too bright, words glowing beneath. "You're next." It was gone in a blink, the screen cutting to an ad for soda, but Nia's breath caught, her scar aching like it was answering. Mira didn't see it, her eyes fixed ahead, her hands empty now, her sketchbook's pages dust in the wind. Nia didn't tell her, couldn't, just kept walking, her sneakers steady, the city's hum rising around them, alive and hungry. Nia and Mira disappeared into the dawn, two figures against a waking city, their shadows trailing too long, too heavy. Times Square stirred, its screens blinking, its streets filling, but something lingered, something that knew their names, their faces, their guilt. And somewhere in Brooklyn or beyond, it was already moving, waiting for the next spark. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more creepy stories. Stay safe, and see you in the next nightmare.